This is Faux-Authentic History.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Brian Young.
And today we are talking about a person who was a hero of the Resistance, sometimes doesn't get that much attention outside of the series of events that sort of led to her name becoming well known within the Resistance. She's a little bit overshadowed sometimes by the actions of her sister, but I thought it would be a good time to take a step back and talk about Paige Tico.
I love Paige Tico.
Me too.
Paige was born in the Automox system on the planet Hayes Minor. The planet and its sister celestial body, Hayes Major, orbited a binary star. Hayes Minor had a cold, dark surface that was uninhabitable without serious protective gear. Hayes Major was a stormy industrial planet. Hayes Minor would send ore to Hayes Major, and would get food, clothing, and life's other necessities in return.
Yeah, they had a nice sort of duality that they had worked out, but the Autobox system actually had not been settled for all that long when Paige was born. Her grandparents were among the first settlers in the system, and while those early settlers had discovered the ore that made Hayes Minor a worthwhile place to mine, they also discovered that underground there were habitable areas of the planet. So the Ticos, like many other families, lived in a pod cluster in the underground caves of Hayes Minor, with an observation dome that jutted out into the above-ground landscape and offered a view of the surface.
Paige's sister Rose was born when Paige was 5. From an early age, the two sisters were extremely close. The pair would often dream together about paths their lives could take, such as joining a circus to travel to planets that needed a dose of joy, and together they fostered a deep-seated love of exploration, which served them well later in life.
I love that detail that they thought about, like, trying to make other people happy. It's just very sweet. But eventually, unfortunately, the Tico's homeworld was ruined by the occupation of the First Order, which took control of the industries on Hayes Major. And then Hayes Minor was used to test military weapons. And initially, the First Order officers on the planet just observed all of these things and kind of kept an eye on the residents there, but eventually they brought in stormtroopers and they started issuing orders to the resident citizens.
They were using the equipment that had long been used to gather Haitian smelt to hunt for other precious metals, which the locals had never heard of. Safety requirements were downgraded, and settlements were destroyed by the First Order's weapons tests.
Yeah, the First Order was after stuff that the residents of the Automox system had never heard of before, so it was a little unclear to them why this was going on. But as the situation escalated and arms dealers started to appear on the planet to purchase the various items that had been passed through the testing phase, Paige and Rose's parents really saw the writing on the wall. So shortly thereafter, a neighboring village was bombed when its inhabitants refused to comply with the First Order's directives. And so the Ticos chose to send their daughters away as refugees, but the parents stayed behind on Hayes Minor to fight the First Order.
Paige and her sister Rose were sent to a spaceport on Hayes Minor with instructions to seek out a Mon Calamari server there and order a specific item, one which wasn't on the menu. After the girls had given the server the code, the wheels of their escape from occupied Hayes Minor were in motion, and soon they found themselves en route to Dakar via freighter.
Their ultimate fate remains unknown, but it is believed that the parents of Rose and Paige Tico were killed in the conflict between the First Order and the residents of Hayes Minor. They were both reported missing not long after Paige and Rose arrived on Dakar.
The only connection to their parents that Rose and Paige retained was a gift they'd been given before leaving their homeworld and being shipped to the Resistance, a set of snow grape medallion pendants made of valuable Haitian smelt, which fit together into sort of a yin-yang circle. The two pendants had been made from smelt that their father's parents, Storm and Etta Tico, had mined. Each Tico sister kept her pendant with her at all times.
And the Tico sisters joined the Resistance to try to help other people who knew the same kind of strife that they had experienced at home on Hayes Minor. And the two did so on the condition that they would always be assigned together. So they ended up serving aboard the Cobalt Hammer, an MG-100 Star Fortress bomber that was part of the Resistance fleet.
When they'd first arrived on the planet Dakar, General Leia Organa herself met with the two young refugees and learned their story and got to know them. That level of hands-on leadership made a lasting impression on Paige and helped foster her unwavering loyalty to the cause. The other major factor in her dedication was her first-hand experience seeing the brutality of the First Order. They were not nice people.
No, she saw what the First Order did to her home in the Automox system, and early on in her service with the Resistance, she saw other worlds being very similarly terrorized. And this experience further cemented her resolve to fight, and she wrote in her diary, quote, "I know the First Order won't stop. They want to destroy everything the New Republic has built. They have to be stopped, and if I can do even a little to stop them, my life will have been worth it."
Paige realized, though, that the individuals within the First Order weren't necessarily evil. She knew that kids were often taken as recruits without having any say in the matter, or by pressuring or coercing parents. The defection of former First Order trooper Finn to the Resistance was an inspiration to her. She also felt that Finn's story might offer a bit of hope to her sister Rose, who struggled with feeling constantly angry as a result of all that the Ticos had been through.
Yeah, Paige kind of used Finn's story as like a didactic discussion point with Rose to be like, not everyone is evil. Some people are trapped there. Look, Finn is a great guy and he did a lot for the Resistance. So she was trying to mitigate sort of the negativity that was creeping in. And Paige was a ball turret gunner. So this was incidentally the only place Paige ever took off her pendant from her parents. So when she was in the ball turret, she would hang it on the gun sight mount for luck. Rose, for her part, proved proficient as a flight engineer with a natural proclivity for brainstorming new uses for tech. The sisters' mother, Paige Tico, had flown a decommissioned Star Fortress on Hayes Minor for a company called Central Ridge Mining. That particular vehicle was stripped and refitted to dig ore. So that ship that they were assigned to was instantly familiar to both of the Tico sisters. Paige had, since spending time on her mother's ore digger, always wanted to be a pilot. She was on track to really become a great one. So she served as Cobalt Hammer's backup pilot, and she looked forward to the day when she would get a regular pilot post of her own.
I guess it's one of the advantages that the Resistance had, in a roundabout way of looking at it, where they have all of this old technology, and everyone's sort of already familiar with it because it's 1 trillion years old.
Right, a lot of them have been exposed to it somewhere in their lives.
Which reminds me of a really interesting story that like the X-Wing, they were like, we need to make sure everybody's familiar with it. So they wrote, the Rebellion actually wrote a manual on how to use an X-Wing and then leaked it out onto the HoloNet, hoping that whenever anybody would like join the Rebellion, they would have seen the instruction manual and would know how to use the X-Wing.
I love it. A little pre-training.
Yeah, exactly. So, Paige kept a journal of her experiences, and in doing so offered unique insight into how she viewed her job as a gunner and backup pilot, and her relationship with her military service. She described how easy it was to become spatially disoriented in the ball turret, floating out in space, where the ideas of up and down lose all meaning. She was also keenly aware that someone in her position couldn't afford to get lost in those thoughts, because you're probably being fired at and had to return fire. And that the ball was no place of luxury, but a spot that rattled when the gunner fired and became extremely hot during battle.
Paige also found those long racks of magno charges that were in the bomber super creepy. She hated having to climb down a ladder past all of those bombs to get to her turret, but this was something that she absolutely kept to herself. Her sister knew about it, but neither of them ever shared it with her commanding officer.
While Paige was committed to the cause of the Resistance, she was not gung-ho about combat. When she was still training and heard seasoned pilots in the mess hall at the Resistance base on Dakar talking about their various exploits, it didn't thrill her. She found it deeply frightening, actually, but she also knew that the stories of lost lives and grave errors made on missions were part of training noobs, letting them know how deeply serious their work was.
Because Paige had some experience with ore diggers, she started ahead of the curve on her training. But accessing her knowledge while also being fired at was a tricky transition for her. She was aware of like how much harder it instantly became, even if you were pretty good on simulators. So she absorbed all of the knowledge that she could from more experienced bomber crews, including a tip that green bomber pilots often gave themselves away by drifting off formation because they tended to always keep their hand on the throttle out of tension, and so she forced herself to learn not to do that.
She also became very aware that a bomber crew could never really see the larger picture that command had in mind, and she quickly understood that this arrangement was a security measure to prevent lower-level personnel from becoming targets for capture and interrogation.
And also, if they were captured, they would not be able to give away the big important information. Paige also came to terms with what she felt was the hardest lesson for her to learn as a ball turret gunner. That sometimes she just had to sit in position and do nothing during missions. Because of the size and the low maneuverability of the bombers relative to other ships in the fleet, pilots of those ships just had to focus on reaching their target and making sure that the payload was dropped.
Being stationed at Dakar offered unique experiences for the sisters as well as military training and mission assignments. Prior to their time there, neither of them had ever seen a live animal, and they'd definitely not been in a place with lush vegetation. But Dakar had both, and Paige was enchanted by it. She would take walks in the jungle with her sister along established paths and marvel at the plant and animal life. The first live animal she ever saw was a sonar swallow, a bird native to Dakar. It was a species that was generally considered a nuisance, but Paige thought the birds and their noise were lovely.
Yeah, that kind of cracks me up. It's like if someone were in New York for the first time and they were like, these birds are beautiful. People are like, they're pigeons. It's kind of like that. They were just a nuisance bird, but she loved them. But before long, Paige was, of course, a combat veteran. She and Cobalt Squadron at one point took out a pirate base on Mamkota in the Cassander sector, and then, after an aborted supply mission to Caraxel, attacked another pirate base on nearby Sheh Sawahi. The first pirate base at Mamkota had been barely easy to take down, but Sheh Sawahi was a much more costly endeavor. This time, Cobalt Squadron lost 2 of their A-wings in the conflict, and they took a lot of damage to several other vessels. But the Resistance forces also came away with intercepted transmissions from those pirates to the First Order asking for help. So that was proof that the First Order was in league with the criminal underworld and was in fact funding some of these pirate missions.
Because this was a time of Cold War and not a declared conflict, the Resistance had to be careful and strategic about their missions. They couldn't engage the First Order in direct battle. All these other missions were planned to minimize the spread of the First Order's power and bolster weaker populations. And sometimes this indirect approach was frustrating to Paige and her sister, but they both understood the importance of trusting their leaders.
Yeah, it's a natural instinct to just want to go right after the bad guys, but you can't always do that. Shortly after that Sheh Sawahi engagement, Paige and the rest of Cobalt Hammer's crew were sent on a spy mission to the Atera system. There, they discovered that the First Order was dumping the bodies of citizens of the system into the acid lakes on the planet Atera Bravo. The people they were disposing of had been attacked and killed by the First Order, but the incidents were always made to look like accidents in a very large-scale cover-up.
Again, the Resistance couldn't engage directly with the First Order without causing a galactic conflict, so they designed a plan to make 4 supply runs to Atera Bravo, giving the remaining people there a real chance to fight back against the First Order's occupation. Paige and her crew posed as temp labor, working as icebreakers. And this was a natural role for Paige to step into, since it was very similar to the work her mother had done on Hayes Minor. While Cobalt Squadron was on their last supply run to Atera Bravo, the First Order destroyed Hosnian Prime, and the First Order and the Resistance were officially at war.
The X-Wing fighters that ran a recon mission to Starkiller Base not long after the Hosnian system was obliterated were tracked back to the Resistance base on Dakar. Cobalt Squadron raced back to the base from their mission in the Atera system in the hopes that they could beat the First Order there and help get the Resistance forces evacuated. The slow nature of the bombers made this difficult to know with any confidence if they were going to make it in time.
Paige was in her turret seat during the ensuing battle, though for the first time her sister Rose was on another ship, the Ninka, and at the request of Vice Admiral Emmeline Holdo, who had been impressed with Rose's engineering skills.
The Resistance was able to get off the planet, but the siege on Dakar was devastating. In an effort to buy time for the evacuation, Commander Poe Dameron attacked the Fulminatrix, a Mandator IV-class siege dreadnought under the command of Captain Moden Kennedy. And this move, which was both brazen and unsanctioned by Resistance Command, resulted in the loss of all of the bombers in the Resistance fleet, plus 4 starfighters.
Paige's bomber had been the last one left in the fight. We know from flight data that she was also the last crew member left alive on the Cobalt Hammer. Through sheer will and determination, she managed to activate and deploy the bomber's full payload of munitions, directly striking the Fulminatrix and destroying the dreadnought. If it hadn't been for Paige and her dedication to the mission, the Resistance would not only have lost all of its bombers, but it would have been for absolutely no benefit. After Dakar, there were only 4 ships left in the Resistance fleet, with approximately 400 personnel.
Paige Tico's death took place in the year 34 ABY. She was a hero of the Resistance and left behind her sister Rose as her only surviving family.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking what people are willing to sacrifice in the name of fighting against evil, and certainly grateful for Paige Tico and her sister Rose.
Yeah, and it's one of those interesting things that often comes up when discussing the ideology of the Resistance, that there is this idea of, like, sparking other people into action and kind of inspiring, and Paige was hugely inspiring to a lot of people, but specifically to her sister Rose, who found herself very much central to the larger conflicts that played out after that.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting to see how her influence inspired her sister and how her sister inspired others, and just watching that sort of chain of title is really fascinating to me.
Agreed, me too.
I've got a bit of mail.
You do? Bring it on!
This is from Louise. Louise writes, "Hi, Holly and Brian. I just wanted to let you know how much my family and I enjoyed your recent episode on Dr. Jukiba, Experiment 626, and his cousins are firm favorites of ours, and we've been lucky enough to meet Stitch on several occasions, most memorably while eating breakfast in Florida, where we were also introduced to the adorable Lilo. We were recently on a Mediterranean cruise, and you can imagine our surprise when we found that we were sailing with Stitch, who caused some consternation by dressing as a pirate. We were delighted to discover that he was not the only friendly pirate that we met that night. Among others were a beautifully dressed mouse and some very cheeky chipmunks. Thank you so much for the brilliant show. It's lovely to find one that can be enjoyed by the whole family and makes long journeys much more bearable. Louise. P.S. My 10-year-old son has an episode request. He's turning 11 soon and looking forward to joining other young trainers on their Pokemon catching journey. To prepare for this, he's wondering if there might be an episode dedicated to this time-honored tradition. I think that's something that's definitely on my list sooner rather than later. So you can tell him that it's possible.
I love that. I love that they got to meet Stitch. I have been fortunate to as well, and I'm mostly happy that people have realized that truly, even though he is from an alien world, he is really not to be feared. He has been tamed, and he's delightful, although still a little bit mischievous.
Yeah, no, I think he's hilarious, personally. I think he should take up stand-up comedy. Why not, right?
Sure.
So,
I don't know how his delivery works, so I can't say one way or the other.
It lands with the force of an atomic bomb.
There you go.
Where can people find you at, Holly?
I'm on Twitter as Surliest Girl or Instagram as SurlyGirly5. And then I have a regular history podcast called Stuff You Missed in History Class, which is at Missed in History pretty much everywhere. And then I also do a Star Wars podcast with you.
Yeah, you can find that at fullofsith.com. We do shows every week, and we talk about Star Wars, and that's all you need to know, right?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it.
You can find me on Twitter at Swankmotron. You can find me just about everywhere at Swankmatron, including my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Swankmatron, where you can find short stories by me. I write about Star Wars and everything else at sci-fi/film starwars.com and a whole bunch of other places. So I hope you'd be interested in keeping up with me. For Authentic History, if you want to go back and listen to our archives, you are more than welcome to do that. We would encourage it highly. You can do so on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever else you listen to episodes, or view our archive at fauthentichistory.com. We love hearing from you. You can contact us by using the contact form at fauthentichistory.com, and that's the best way to get a hold of us. So, and be sure to rate us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever else you get your episodes, and let them know what you think of the show. Do you have anything else, Holly?
I don't. You covered all the bases.
Well, until next time, then. Which should be a lot sooner than last time.